The blood on her pink scrubs was still wet when she heard the little girl scream. Sarah Miller looked up from the unconscious gunman at her feet, her medical training warring with her lethal CIA instincts. The child she had been hired to protect stood frozen in the doorway, her blonde hair tangled, her blue dress torn, but it was the tears streaming down her face that made Sarah's heart shatter. More footsteps echoed through the mansion hallway, heavy boots, multiple men, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of her cover identity dying forever. She had spent 6 months becoming the perfect nanny, the harmless caregiver who read bedtime stories and bandaged scraped knees, but the 5 armed men lying motionless around her told a different story entirely. The little girl's eyes met hers, wide with terror and confusion. "Miss Sarah," she whispered. And in that moment, the most dangerous woman in the CIA realized she had just blown the most important mission of her career to save the one person who had made her remember what it felt like to be human. Stay with me until the end, because this story will show you that sometimes the deadliest weapons come disguised as the gentlest hearts. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Boston, and the autumn of 2019 was shaping up to be the bloodiest year in the Rossi family's recent history. Inside the sprawling estate on Beacon Hill, the Romano mansion stood like a fortress against the storm, its windows glowing warm against the October darkness. But the comfort of those lights was deceptive. This wasn't just any wealthy family's home. This was the headquarters of New England's most powerful crime syndicate, and every person who walked through its doors understood the unspoken rules. Vincent Rossi sat in his mahogany-paneled office on the 3rd floor, reviewing shipping manifests that detailed far more than legitimate cargo. At 58, he had built an empire that stretched from Boston to Miami, controlling everything from underground gambling to high-end art theft. His dark hair was going silver at the temples, but his reputation for calculated violence remained as sharp as ever. Tonight, like every Wednesday for the past 12 years, he was planning the weekly distribution of territory and settling disputes that lesser men couldn't handle. The mansion staff moved through the halls with practiced silence. Every maid knew which rooms to avoid during business hours. Every cook understood that certain conversations were never overheard. The security team, 12 men handpicked for their loyalty and skill, maintained constant surveillance of the grounds. Motion sensors tracked every footstep. Cameras recorded every entrance and exit. The Rossi estate was designed to be impenetrable, but Vincent's greatest vulnerability lived on the 2nd floor, in a room painted soft yellow and filled with picture books and stuffed animals. 7-year-old Isabella Rossi was the light of her father's dark world, the only person who could make him smile without calculation behind it. Her mother had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, an event that had hardened Vincent's heart even further. Since then, Isabella had become both his greatest joy and his most dangerous weakness. That's why finding the right nanny had been so crucial. Vincent had interviewed 43 candidates before Sarah Miller walked into his office 6 months ago. She had been perfect on paper and even better in person. Pediatric nursing degree from Johns Hopkins, 10 years of experience with high-profile families, impeccable references, background checks that revealed nothing more interesting than a few speeding tickets, and an impressive collection of medical certifications. What those background checks hadn't revealed was that Sarah Miller was actually Sarah Chen, a 12-year veteran of the CIA's Special Operations Division with a body count that would have impressed Vincent's most ruthless enforcers. She spoke 6 languages fluently, could kill a man in 17 different ways with her bare hands, and had spent the last decade infiltrating terrorist cells and dismantling international crime syndicates. But for the past 6 months, she had been reading bedtime stories about princess and dragons, teaching Isabella how to braid friendship bracelets, and slowly falling in love with the one assignment she should never have allowed herself to care about. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sarah had been inserted into the Rossi household to gather evidence for the largest RICO case in Massachusetts history. Her handler, Deputy Director Marcus Webb, had chosen her specifically because her background in pediatric nursing made the cover identity believable. She was supposed to be invisible, unnoticed, just another piece of household staff, while she photographed documents and recorded conversations that would bring down Vincent Rossi's entire organization. But Vincent Rossi, the crime boss, was different from Vincent Rossi, the father, and Sarah hadn't been prepared for that. She watched him read Isabella bedtime stories with voices for all the characters. She saw him attend every parent-teacher conference, even when it meant rescheduling meetings with associates who controlled millions of dollars in illegal enterprise. She witnessed him wake up from nightmares about losing his daughter the same way he'd lost his wife, and she realized that beneath the calculating exterior was a man who loved his child more than his empire. That love was about to be tested in the most violent way possible. The Torino family had been the Rossis' main rivals for 15 years, but their latest move was unprecedented. Instead of targeting Vincent's businesses or territories, they had decided to strike at his heart. Intelligence suggested they were planning to kidnap Isabella, not for ransom, but to force Vincent into a position where he would have to choose between his daughter's life and his organization's survival. The CIA had intercepted communications indicating the attempt would happen soon, but they didn't know exactly when. Sarah had reported this information to her handler 3 weeks ago, recommending that the operation be accelerated. Webb had refused. The Justice Department wanted Vincent Rossi taken down properly, with enough evidence to ensure he never saw freedom again. They couldn't risk blowing Sarah's cover before they had everything they needed to prosecute not just Vincent, but his entire network. That decision was about to cost everyone more than anyone had imagined. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing Isabella's afternoon snack when the first security camera went dark. She noticed it immediately because she had memorized the mansion's surveillance patterns during her first month on the job. Camera 12, which monitored the East Garden entrance, should have shown the view every 8 seconds on the security monitor visible from the kitchen doorway. When it didn't cycle through at exactly 3:47 p.m., Sarah felt her training kick in. She moved to the window and looked toward the garden. Nothing seemed out of place, but 15 years of covert operations had taught her to trust her instincts over her eyes. Something was wrong. She reached for her phone to text Vincent's head of security, but before she could type the message, camera 9 went dark, then camera 6, then camera 3. This wasn't a technical malfunction. This was a coordinated attack. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could trigger the mansion's alarm system, which would lock down the entire building and alert Vincent's private security team. She could call the police, though they would take too long to arrive, and their presence would complicate everything. Or she could maintain her cover and hope that Vincent's security team was competent enough to handle whatever was coming. Then she heard Isabella's laughter from upstairs, and the decision made itself. Sarah ran toward the second floor, taking the steps 3 at a time. Isabella was in her playroom having a tea party with her collection of stuffed animals, completely oblivious to the danger surrounding her. She looked up when Sarah burst through the doorway, her face lighting up with the pure joy that had been slowly breaking down Sarah's professional detachment for months. "Miss Sarah, you have to try the tea. Mr. Button says it's the best he's ever had." Sarah forced herself to smile while her mind calculated distances, exit routes, and defensive positions. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, but right now we need to play a different game, a hiding game." Isabella's eyes widened with excitement. "Like hide and seek." "Exactly like that. But this time we need to hide really, really well and stay completely quiet until I say it's safe to come out. Can you do that for me?" Isabella nodded eagerly. She trusted Miss Sarah completely, just as she trusted her father and the security guards and everyone else who made her world feel safe and predictable. She had no way of knowing that in 30 seconds that world was about to explode into violence. Sarah grabbed Isabella's hand and moved toward the panic room that Vincent had shown her during her first week. It was hidden behind a false wall in Isabella's closet, equipped with its own air supply, communications equipment, and enough supplies to last 72 hours. As they reached the closet door, Sarah heard the first window shatter downstairs. The Torino assault team had arrived. There were 5 of them, all wearing black tactical gear and carrying automatic weapons. They moved through the mansion with military precision, neutralizing security cameras and disabling alarm systems with equipment that suggested this operation had been planned for months. Their leader, Carlo Torino, was Vincent's nephew, who had been exiled from the family 8 years ago for questioning his uncle's leadership. He knew the mansion's layout perfectly, understood its security weaknesses, and had a personal grudge that made this more than just business. Vincent was still in his office when the attack began, reviewing shipping manifests with 2 of his lieutenants. His head of security, Anthony Ricci, had been monitoring the camera feeds when they started going dark. He reached for his radio to alert the patrol teams at exactly the moment the first assault team member came through the kitchen window. The gunfire started on the ground floor and moved upward like a deadly tide. Vincent's security team was well trained and heavily armed, but they had been caught completely off guard. 3 guards went down in the first 60 seconds of the attack. 2 more were pinned down in defensive positions that wouldn't hold for long. Anthony Ricci managed to trigger the building's lockdown protocol before a sniper's bullet ended his life, but the steel shutters that sealed the windows also trapped everyone inside with the attacking force. Vincent grabbed the pistol from his desk drawer and prepared to defend his office. But his first thought was for Isabella. She should be safe in her playroom with her nanny, but safe was a relative concept when armed men were shooting their way through his home. He tried to call Sarah's phone, but the assault team had jammed all cellular communications. The landlines had been cut. Even the mansion's internal communication system was down. For the first time in 20 years, Vincent Rossi felt completely powerless. Meanwhile, on the second floor, Sarah was experiencing a crisis that would haunt her for the rest of her life, however long that might be. She had gotten Isabella safely into the panic room and sealed the hidden door, but as she turned to leave, the little girl grabbed her hand. "Don't go, Miss Sarah. Please don't leave me alone." Sarah looked down into those trusting brown eyes and felt something shatter inside her chest. Her training told her to secure the asset and extract herself from the combat zone. Her mission parameters clearly stated that her cover identity was more valuable than any single operation. But Isabella wasn't an asset or a mission parameter. She was a 7-year-old girl who was terrified and alone, and she was asking the one person she trusted most not to abandon her. "I'll stay right here," Sarah whispered, settling down beside Isabella in the cramped space. "No one is going to hurt you. I promise." It was a promise she intended to keep, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had worked for. The first assault team member reached the second floor 12 minutes after the attack began. Sarah heard his boots on the hardwood through the panic room's audio sensors, watched him move past Isabella's bedroom on the surveillance monitor Vincent had installed. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of nervous energy that made dangerous people do stupid things. He checked Isabella's bedroom first, then her bathroom, then started moving toward the playroom. Sarah had a choice to make. She could stay hidden and hope he wouldn't find the panic room's entrance. She could try to take him down silently and maintain the element of surprise. Or she could do what every instinct screamed at her to do: protect Isabella at any cost. When the assault team member started pulling books off the shelves in the playroom, clearly looking for hidden passages, Sarah made her decision. She kissed Isabella's forehead and whispered, "Stay here no matter what you hear. Stay here until your daddy comes to get you." Then she opened the panic room door and stepped back into the world she had tried to leave behind. The assault team member spun toward her as she emerged from the closet, his weapon already rising. He saw a young woman in pink medical scrubs, with her hair in a neat ponytail and no visible weapons. His training told him she was a non-combatant, possibly useful as a hostage or source of information about the building's layout. His mistake was assuming that pink scrubs and a gentle demeanor meant she was harmless. Sarah moved with the fluid precision of someone who had killed before and would kill again if necessary. She covered the 12 feet between them before he could fully process the threat, her hand striking his wrist with enough force to fracture bone and send his rifle clattering across the floor. Her other hand found his throat, applying pressure to the carotid arteries with surgical precision. He tried to call out, tried to fight back, but unconsciousness claimed him in less than 10 seconds. Sarah caught his body as he fell, lowering him silently to the carpet. She relieved him of his backup weapon, a 9mm pistol with a 15-round magazine, and his radio. For the first time in 6 months, she felt the familiar weight of a firearm in her hand, and muscle memory took over. The radio crackled with voices speaking Italian, coordinating their search pattern. They were looking for Isabella specifically, and they knew she was somewhere on the second floor. 4 more men were moving through the building, and they would reach the playroom within minutes. Sarah could have retreated back into the panic room with Isabella. She could have sealed the door and waited for law enforcement to arrive. She could have preserved her cover identity and completed her mission exactly as planned. Instead, she moved toward the hallway to meet the rest of the assault team head-on. The second man died as he rounded the corner toward Isabella's bedroom. Sarah was waiting behind the door, and she took him down with a combination of techniques they didn't teach in medical school. The third man heard his partner's body hit the floor and came running, only to find himself facing a woman who moved like a dancer and struck like lightning. He managed to get off one shot before Sarah's training took over completely, but the bullet went wide and embedded itself in the hallway wall. By the time Carlo Torino reached the second floor with his remaining men, he found 3 of his assault team members unconscious or dead, and no sign of the gentle nanny who was supposed to be somewhere on this level. What he found instead were bloodstains on pink medical scrubs, and the sound of his carefully planned operation falling apart around him. The fourth man was Carlo's nephew, a 22-year-old hothead named Marcus, who had insisted on being part of this operation, despite his lack of experience. He came up the back staircase while Carlo approached from the main stairs, intending to pincer whatever resistance they were facing. He expected to encounter Vincent's security team or maybe Vincent himself. He didn't expect to walk into a nightmare. Sarah was waiting in Isabella's bedroom when Marcus entered. She had positioned herself behind the door, using the shadows and her medical training to control her breathing and heart rate. When Marcus stepped into the room, she moved like death itself, her hands finding pressure points that dropped him before he could make a sound. But Marcus had been wearing a body camera, and Carlo saw everything through the tactical display on his wrist. He watched his nephew disappear from view, watched the pink-scrubbed figure move with a precision that belonged in Special Forces training videos, not in a little girl's bedroom. He realized with growing horror that this wasn't random resistance from household staff. This was someone with military-level combat training, someone who had been hiding in plain sight for months. The radio on Sarah's belt crackled with Carlo's voice, speaking English now instead of Italian. "I don't know who you are, but I know you can hear me. We came here for the girl. Give her to us, and you can walk away from this alive. Keep fighting and I'll burn this whole building down with everyone in it." Sarah looked toward the closet where Isabella was hidden, then at the unconscious man at her feet, then at the weapon in her hand. 6 months of careful infiltration was ending in exactly the kind of violence she had been trying to avoid. But Isabella was safe, Vincent was alive, and sometimes that was the best outcome you could achieve in an imperfect world. She keyed the radio and spoke for the first time with her real voice, the one that belonged to CIA operative Sarah Chen instead of pediatric nurse Sarah Miller. "Carlo Torino. You're 38 years old, born in Providence, Rhode Island. Your mother was Maria Santos before she married your father. You served 18 months in federal prison for aggravated assault in 2015. You have a scar on your left shoulder from a knife fight in Southie when you were 23. The silence on the radio stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Then Carlo's voice came back, much quieter than before. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who's been watching your family for 8 months. I know about the heroin distribution network you're running through the North End. I know about the murder of James Morrison in September. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And I know that in approximately 6 minutes, this building is going to be surrounded by federal agents who have warrants for your arrest." It was a bluff, but it was a good one. Sarah had no way to contact her handler or call for backup, but Carlo didn't know that. What he did know was that someone with access to classified information about his operations was currently killing his men with embarrassing ease. "You're FBI," he said finally. "Worse," Sarah replied, "and right now you have 2 choices. You can surrender and spend the rest of your life in federal prison, or you can keep fighting and spend the rest of your life in a body bag. But either way, you're not leaving here with Isabella Rossi." The final confrontation took place on the main staircase, where Carlo had positioned himself to cover both the front door and the second-floor landing. He was a professional criminal with 20 years of experience in violence, armed with military-grade weapons and wearing body armor that could stop most handgun rounds. Sarah was wearing pink scrubs and carrying a pistol she had taken from a dead man. with no backup and no way to call for help. But Carlo had made the same mistake his assault team had made. He looked at the young woman descending the stairs and saw what he expected to see: a nanny who had gotten lucky, a civilian who had stumbled into a situation beyond her comprehension. He didn't see the CIA operative who had spent 3 years in Afghanistan hunting Taliban commanders through caves and mountain passes. He didn't see the woman who had survived interrogation by Russian intelligence and extraction from a blown cover operation in Syria. When Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs, Carlo was waiting with his rifle aimed directly at her chest. "Drop the weapon," he commanded, "and maybe we can work something out." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 6 months, it wasn't the gentle expression Isabella was used to seeing. It was the smile of a predator who had been pretending to be prey for far too long. "You first," she said quietly, and moved. Carlo had good reflexes and professional training, but Sarah had something he didn't. She had been preparing for this moment every day for the past 6 months, practicing combat scenarios in her mind while she read bedtime stories and made peanut butter sandwiches. She had memorized every angle, every piece of cover, every tactical advantage the mansion's layout provided. The gunfight lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it was over, Carlo Torino lay unconscious at the bottom of the stairs, and Sarah stood over him with smoking gun in her hand and blood on her pink scrubs. The assault team was neutralized, Isabella was safe, and Sarah's cover identity was completely blown. That's when she heard the slow clapping from the top of the stairs. Vincent Rossi descended toward her, his own weapon holstered, his expression unreadable. Behind him came 3 of his security guards who had survived the assault, their faces showing a mixture of shock and professional admiration. They had all heard the radio communications, had all witnessed Sarah systematically dismantling a 5-man assault team with nothing but her bare hands and a borrowed pistol. "Miss Sarah Miller," Vincent said as he reached the bottom of the stairs. "Or should I say Agent Sarah Chen of the Central Intelligence Agency?" Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could maintain her cover story, though that was obviously pointless now. She could attempt to negotiate her way out of the building, though she was outnumbered and outgunned. She could try to fight her way to freedom, though that would mean leaving Isabella behind. Or she could do the one thing she had never considered in 12 years of covert operations. She could tell the truth. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said, lowering her weapon but not dropping it entirely. "I've been undercover in your household for 6 months, gathering evidence for a federal RICO investigation. My mission was to document your criminal activities and identify your associates for prosecution by the Department of Justice." Vincent nodded, as if this information wasn't particularly surprising. "And now?" Sarah looked toward the 2nd floor, where Isabella was still hidden in the panic room, probably terrified and confused about the gunshots and shouting she'd heard. She thought about the little girl who had taught her how to make friendship bracelets, who had fallen asleep, holding her hand during thunderstorms, who had made her remember what it felt like to care about something more than the mission. "Now I don't care about the mission," she said. "Your daughter is safe. That's all that matters." Vincent studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching for deception or hidden agenda. What he found instead was something he recognized from his own heart, the fierce protectiveness of someone who would sacrifice everything for a child's safety. "Isabella calls you Miss Sarah," he said finally. "She talks about you constantly, how you helped her with her nightmare about monsters, how you taught her to braid her doll's hair, how you stayed with her in the hospital when she had pneumonia last month, even though it wasn't part of your job." Sarah remembered that night. Isabella's fever had spiked to 104 degrees, and Vincent had been in New York on business. Sarah had ridden in the ambulance, held Isabella's hand through the IV insertion, and slept in the hospital chair for 3 nights until the crisis passed. She had told her handler it was necessary to maintain her cover, but the truth was simpler. She couldn't bear to leave Isabella alone. "She's an amazing little girl," Sarah said quietly. "She deserves to be safe and loved and protected from all of this." Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Yes, she does. Which is why I need to know, Agent Chen. When your handlers ordered you to gather evidence against me, what exactly did they want you to do?" Sarah hesitated, but she had already crossed every line that mattered. They wanted photographs of financial documents, recordings of conversations with your associates, schedules of your meetings and movements. They wanted enough evidence to seize your assets, arrest your entire organization, and ensure you never saw freedom again. And did you provide them with this evidence? Some of it. Bank statements, shipping manifests, communication logs, but nothing that would implicate you personally in violent crimes, and nothing that would put Isabella at risk. Vincent walked closer, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the mansion. Why? Because I realized that Vincent Rossi, the crime boss, and Vincent Rossi, the father, are two different people, and the father is someone worth protecting. It was the truth, and they both knew it. Sarah had seen Vincent's ruthlessness in business, his calculated approach to violence and intimidation. But she had also seen him cry when Isabella lost her first tooth, had watched him spend hours researching the best schools for her future, had witnessed him transform into someone gentle and loving the moment his daughter entered the room. "My people want to know what we should do with you," Vincent said, gesturing toward his security guards. "Some of them think you're too dangerous to let leave. Others think you've earned the right to walk away." "And what do you think?" Vincent pulled out his phone and scrolled through something, then turned the screen towards Sarah. It was a photograph of Isabella in her hospital bed, holding Sarah's hand while she slept. Vincent had taken it during one of his visits, and Isabella had insisted he print it and put it in her scrapbook. "I think my daughter loves you," he said simply, "and I think you love her back. Everything else is just business." Sarah felt tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years, finally spilling down her cheeks. "I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to care this much. But you do care, which means you understand the choice I have to make." Vincent walked to the window and looked out at the storm that was still raging over Boston. Federal agents would be arriving soon. The Justice Department would want answers about the assault on his home, explanations about the dead and wounded men scattered throughout his building. His organization would demand retaliation against the Torino family for this unprecedented attack. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, he had to protect the one person who mattered more than anything else. "I could kill you," he said without turning around. "Claim you were part of the assault team, that you were killed defending my daughter. No one would question that story, and your body would disappear forever." Sarah nodded. She had known this was a possibility from the moment she decided to break cover. "You could. Or I could let you walk away. Change your identity again. Start over somewhere new. Forget Isabella and this family and everything that happened here." "I could never forget Isabella." Vincent turned back toward her, and for the first time since the gunfight ended, he smiled. "No, I don't think you could, which is why I'm going to offer you a third option." Sarah waited, her heart pounding. "Stay," Vincent said simply. "Not as Agent Chen, not as Miss Miller, as Sarah, the woman who saved my daughter's life and gave up everything to keep her safe. Stay and be the mother Isabella lost, the family she needs, the protection she deserves." The offer hung in the air between them, like a bridge spanning two different worlds. On one side lay Sarah's old life, the CIA, the missions, the endless cycle of violence and deception that had defined her existence for 12 years. On the other side lay something she had never allowed herself to want: a home, a family, a child who needed her as much as she needed the child. "The federal investigation," she said finally, "will find that Agent Sarah Chen died protecting a civilian family from a terrorist attack. Very heroic, very tragic, very final. And my handler will receive a closed casket funeral and a flag folded by honor guards." "And Isabella?" Vincent's expression grew soft again. "Isabella will wake up tomorrow morning to find that Miss Sarah survived the attack and decided to stay forever, just like she's been hoping for months." Sarah looked around the mansion that had been her prison and her sanctuary, the place where she had learned to love someone more than her mission. Through the window she could see the first police cars arriving, their blue lights cutting through the storm. Soon there would be questions and investigations and paperwork that would document the official version of what happened here. But the truth would remain between her and Vincent. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not for country or duty, but for the innocent soul who needs you to choose love over everything else. There's just one condition, Vincent added. What? Isabella has been asking if you can read her the story about the princess and the dragon tonight. Apparently it's very important that you do the voice for the dragon correctly. Sarah laughed through her tears, a sound that belonged entirely to the woman she had become, rather than the agent she had been. I think I can manage that. 2 years later, Sarah stood on the balcony of the Rossi estate, watching Isabella play in the garden below. The little girl was 9 now, taller and more confident, but she still insisted that Sarah braid her hair every morning and read her bedtime stories about brave princesses and gentle dragons. The federal investigation into Vincent's organization had quietly faded away after Agent Sarah Chen's heroic death, and the official records showed that the Rossi family had been victims of a terrorist attack rather than targets of law enforcement. Vincent emerged from his study and joined her on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of contentment that had become common over the past 24 months. His business had evolved too, shifting away from the more violent enterprises toward legitimate investments and charitable foundations. Not because he'd grown soft, but because he'd realized that the best way to protect his family was to build something worth protecting. Isabella asked me this morning if we could adopt a dog, he said, handing Sarah her coffee. And what did you tell her? That she'd have to ask her mother. Sarah smiled at the word that had gradually become natural between them. Not stepmother or guardian or caretaker, but simply mother. The role she had been afraid to want and afraid to lose, now given freely by the man who understood the depth of her sacrifice. I think a dog sounds perfect, she said, watching Isabella chase butterflies through the flowers. She needs something else to take care of. Vincent nodded. She gets that from you, you know, the need to protect things. Below them, Isabella looked up and waved, her face bright with the joy of a child who knew herself to be completely safe and unconditionally loved. She had never learned the full truth about that terrible night 2 years ago, had never understood that her beloved Miss Sarah was anything other than the woman who chose to stay and become her family, and Sarah intended to keep it that way. The former CIA agent had disappeared forever, buried under false documents and fabricated death certificates. In her place stood Sarah Rossi, wife and mother and protector of the most important mission she had ever accepted. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with weapons or strategy or tactical advantage. Sometimes they're won by choosing love over duty, family over mission, and the future over the past. Thanks for watching. And remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove love is the most powerful force in the world, capable of transforming even the most hardened hearts into something beautiful.